Welcome to the Hero Next Door podcast, where we feature stories of everyday heroes. These are people who might live right next door to you, but they become our heroes because of the things that they do to show they're caring for the world. I'm Marilyn Fitzpatrick. I'm a psychologist, a professor emerita of counseling psychology at McGill University, and the host of Hero Next Door. Today, our hero is Zoe Huml. Zoe's a 19-year-old student in her first year of university. She's also the founder of the HIP Hero Club, which is the youth-led branch of the Heroic Imagination Project. The Heroic Imagination Project works to equip people to solve local and global problems by acting heroically. And Zoe's club has the same mission, but it's directed to high school students to help them learn how to step outside their comfort zones and to make a difference in their schools, in their community, in the world. Joining me after Zoe's interview to comment on it is Dr. Jamie Wu from State University of Michigan. Jamie studies out-of-school time initiatives, so things children and youth do outside their school time. Her work examines how youth-driven initiatives, like the ones that Zoe undertook, can be fostered, how to involve youth and give a voice and leadership roles to our leaders of tomorrow. But first, Zoe's story.
So the HIP Hero Club is the youth branch of the Heroic Imagination Project. And to start, I think it would be most helpful to go over the Heroic Imagination Project and its mission at large, because it is the youth branch of it. It is a nonprofit dedicated to inspiring and empowering everyday heroes, and was founded by Dr. Philip Zimbardo, who is a Stanford emeritus professor. And Dr. Zimbardo is really a living legend in psychology and is probably most well known for his Stanford prison experiment. And in his research, he showed how when faced with certain circumstances or social pressures, ordinary and good people can be influenced to act in really immoral or horrifying ways. And this is kind of a shocking and kind of scary conclusion, honestly, because I think a lot of us like to think that there's more like a strict line between people that do good or bad things. And we see someone doing something bad and we kind of justify it by saying, oh, well, they're a bad person, so that makes sense. When really it's not like that. And like social influences are very powerful and it's much more permeable. But after finding this conclusion, Dr. Zimbardo kind of wanted to flip it on its head and see, is it possible that everyone has the potential also to be a hero? Is it possible that anybody could do a heroic act? And he ultimately concluded that yes, and that's what the Heroic Imagination Project is dedicated to, really seeding the world with everyday heroes and giving them the tools to step up and act heroically. And a big part of our goal is democratizing the concept of heroism, because people oftentimes think that heroes are people with supernatural abilities or someone who dedicates their whole life to a cause. And of course, there are people like that. But I think this goes really hand in hand with this podcast, because heroes are oftentimes people who live next door to us, or people who are doing small actions in a positive direction that end up having a big impact in the end. So since I was young, I was aware of the Heroic Imagination Project, and I always really resonated with the message. And I think as I got older, it started resonating with me more once I was in high school. And I wanted to find a way to spread this to youth, because I think it's a really important message for students and for young people, especially because I think young people often underestimate the power that they have to make change, or they think that they can't do anything like meaningful because they're young, when that really isn't the case. And I think the idea that everybody can be a hero is like really powerful. I was homeschooled, but I took many of my classes through Stanford Online High School. And although it's online, we have a really thriving club community. And I also ran a different club at my school, a student athlete book club. I was an athlete throughout high school and my whole life before that. So I would say I really saw how impactful clubs can be and meeting consistently. And I think the format of some of the HIP initiatives in the past have been somebody has a HIP board member fly out and they give a few-day talk and then they leave, which I think can be super impactful. But I also wanted to see how would it work if it was kind of throughout the whole year, and like every few weeks or every month they had this session and they could talk about their experiences and kind of have it like throughout the whole year. So I think that was what inspired me to kind of do it in this format as a club. And I proposed to Dr. Zimbardo and the Heroic Imagination Project board the idea for the HIP Hero Club. And the HIP Hero Club is a 3-phase and 12-session curriculum that can be used in schools as in a club format. And for each session that there is, we offer what's called a club in a box. So it's called a club in a box because it has everything that a club leader would need to start and to lead their club. So that includes slides, leader notes, videos, activities, discussion starters, and more. So we really want to give everything and all the tools that anybody would need. So if a motivated teacher or student wants to get involved, we can say, here is this club in a box, and then they can kind of spread the message in their own school. So yeah, that essentially is what the HIP Hero Club is. I would say my first interest in psychology started when I was really young, probably 6 or 7 years old. And my dad, around when I was that age, was a volunteer actually for the Heroic Imagination Project right when it was starting. And I remember he would come home and he would be so excited about all the social psychology experiments he was learning about, because that's a really central aspect to the Heroic Imagination Project, is using applied social psychology. So I remember vividly him showing me the brown-eyed, blue-eyes experiment and some bystander effect videos. And I was so young, I don't think I even really knew that these experiments were associated with psychology. But I just remember being super drawn to them and super like fascinated about like why people were acting the way that they were. And this interest in psychology kind of re-emerged in high school, I would say. I was a competitive athlete, so I was interested in sports psychology. And then I also took a few classes. And I think I was initially so drawn to psychology because I think a lot of times the reasons why we act, think, and behave the ways we do are unbeknownst to us. We don't really know why. But by uncovering it or understanding the mechanisms behind it, then I think that leaves room to change. And it kind of gives us agency over our own lives, which I think is like the seed for any like individual or social change. And yeah, I was really interested in the Heroic Imagination Project because that's kind of what they do. They use applied social psychology to inspire social change and heroism. So I think that was throughout my childhood why I was initially interested in psychology and the Heroic Imagination Project. So the HIP Hero Club has 3 phases. The first phase is Fortify. So like I said before, oftentimes social influences affect us without our knowledge, and they can serve as barriers to heroic action. So if we take like the bystander effect or conformity or blind obedience to authority. So by learning about these, then we're empowered to then instead step up. We kind of gain this like insight over why we act the way we do. So that's this like foundation. And then the second part is the inspire. So what it means to be a hero and to act heroically. And then the final phase is the call to action. In our final phase, we talk a bit about, or that's kind of what we focus on, is how to implement and actually like act heroically. And there's many things that we can do in our daily lives. I think a big thing, obviously, we're called the Heroic Imagination Project, and the heroic imagination is the ability to imagine yourself acting heroically in a challenging situation. So psychology has long shown the importance of visualization, and it essentially is the same thing. I kind of think of it in relation to sports, because sports is there's a lot of visualization that goes on. And if you visualize yourself doing something over and over, then when you actually do it, you're more prepared and more likely to actually do it correctly. And that's pretty much the same thing. If you're reading the news or reading an article and you see an example, oh, this person ran into a car and to save a baby or whatever it is, then you think, oh, okay, what are the challenges if I was in that situation? How would I be feeling? What would be the best course of action for me? Like, what would be some obstacles that I might face? And you kind of go through this imaginary situation in your head and think, oh, how could I most effectively answer that problem or respond to it? And then when you actually face a situation, maybe not that exact one, but a similar one, then it kind of is just autopilot. You're ready to go. So that's one thing that we definitely promote at the Heroic Imagination Project, is this idea of heroic imagination. So the ultimate goal of the HIP Hero Club is for students to recognize like what the causes that they're passionate about, the values that they have, and the skills that they have, and what the intersection is and how they can act heroically. So I would say the first goal is that members will be more reflective of themselves in social situations and recognize like how these can affect their actions. And then second of all, I think this kind of leads into the second part, is recognizing what they are passionate about and the actions that they want to do, but also recognizing that there's infinite possibilities for like social change, and they can be that really vehicle of social change, and like recognizing. So I think it is like an empowering message as well. So that's kind of our hope, is that club members and club leaders, after going through the curriculum, will be motivated. And I would say there have been different anecdotes. One teacher shared with us how a student was on a bus, for example, and they saw another student being teased. And usually maybe it would be their inclination to not do anything or just sit there, but they recognize, no, my surroundings are my responsibility, and I am going to do something. I'm going to act heroically. And then they found an administrator, and then they like helped sort it out. And also actually just earlier today, earlier this year in about February, we started some HIP Hero Clubs. We partnered with an organization, and they translated the curriculum into French. And in Senegal, we had some schools testing the curriculum as well. And earlier today, I got some feedback from the Senegalese students. It was translated, and they were sharing how they were more reflective about their own actions and how they like responded to social situations, and how that would inspire them to act heroically. So it's always really fills my cup and empowers me when I hear these like stories of students who are really like resonating with what we're teaching. Starting the HIP Hero Club has impacted me greatly. I think that something we really support or preach at the HIP Hero Club is that anybody can be a vehicle for social change, and you can have an impact, and just you should do something that you're passionate about and not really have the end result in mind, and just kind of just work in a right direction and see where it ends. And for me, I've kind of seen it in my own life, because if 3 years ago I told myself that I would create this curriculum and be leading this global initiative, I think I would be intimidated or not really like even believe myself. But then just by taking one step in front of the other and like recognizing what you're passionate about. Like I knew I'm passionate about psychology, and I'm passionate about applied psychology, so I want to do that, but like taking one step in front of the other. And then yeah, I think that's like what's impacted me the most, is I've kind of seen what we're teaching at the Heroic Imagination Project, like in my own life, which has been really cool. In the Heroic Imagination Project, our definition of a hero is someone who acts for the good of others while understanding the risk or sacrifice involved. And I think that this definition can be slightly intimidating sometimes, because when we think risk or sacrifice, we might think like risking your life or something like that, or like extreme physical risk. While a lot of times, especially in schools, that's not the case. It's most of the time social risk. For example, if you see someone being made fun of for the food that they have in the cafeteria or whatever it is, if you step up, you know that, oh, maybe they're going to bring the attention on me and start bullying me, or I'm going to be looked down upon. So I think it's really like this social risk that we kind of emphasize in the Heroic Imagination Project, and especially the HIP Hero Club, because we are talking to students. We're not saying we want you to go like jump onto train tracks to save somebody or something. Like that is an extraordinary example, and like probably most people aren't going to have a case where they could actually do that. But these social situations, I think being a high schooler, being a college student, there are always so many social influences at play, or like really challenging situations. So it's really like this social risk is the risk that we kind of talk about in the HIP Hero Club. If somebody would like to get involved or they resonate with our message, I would say the first thing would be to just go to our website, which is hipheroclub.org. And on there, we have more information about the curriculum. We have write-ups about each session and we have videos. And if you're interested, there is an application page for teachers or for students. Or if somebody has any specific questions, our email is on there as well. And I'm more than happy to connect and answer any questions as well.
I find Zoe's story an inspiring example of how a very young person can step up and lead such a valuable and useful project with international scope. As she said, she even surprised herself by what she was able to do. Joining me to comment on her story, I'm very happy to welcome Dr. Jamie Wu. Jamie's an assistant research professor in the Department of Human Development and Family and the associate director for community evaluation programs, university outreach and engagement at Michigan State University. Her area of expertise is out-of-school time initiatives for children and youth. And the branch of her research that we'll focus on today helps to try and understand how to nurture youth voices, how to involve youth in prosocial leadership, and how to set up and develop youth-adult partnerships in community settings. So, Jamie, thank you so much for being here today on Hero Next Door and talking to us about Zoe and about youth-adult partnerships in support of leadership development. So I really appreciate your expertise in this area. And I think that we can have a great conversation about how Zoe is typical and not typical of youth that we may see. But first, maybe we can start with just the idea of how do you think that youth become involved in prosocial leadership?
Adults need to draw on youth interests. So, and oftentimes we're competing that interest with computer games, social media. So it's not necessarily easy to have a youth come out and say, I want to do this for the goods of others, right? So it does take some kind of a adult encouragement and then also drawing from their own intrinsic motivation to enable that kind of a prosocial acts.
Okay, so by intrinsic motivation, you mean the thing that they feel like is important to them, the thing that's naturally important to them, and they're so involved in computer games and social media and so on that very often that may not be too evident to them.
Oh yeah, we're talking about consuming information in this time when they also have a lot of pressures in their life, right? So it is understandable that they want to just enjoy their moments and kind of see what they get instead of coming up with an idea and saying, let's change the world. It takes a kind of a big jump, and adults should be more encouraging or paying attention to what naturally interests them. Greta said, I first started turning off the light when I leave a room, right? Yeah. And I eventually like doing more and recycle, and then eventually I have my parents do it. So, and now it's a global movement, but it does started from like this little thought about what you care and what you can do, and sort of enabling to have them feel like they can do it, they can make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, Zoe said this. She said she believes that youth really underestimate their power, their own power to make a change.
Right. And, in some sense, social media nowadays can be helpful in making them connected and feel like they are part of a bigger something, and feel more empowered. But it can also go the other way, right? So the youth adult partnership, the adult support, it plays a critical role in here. And doesn't have to be your parents. It can be a mentor, a natural mentor that we talk about. And Zoe is all put together a well-rounded youth and now young adults. But she does have a lot of resources that maybe other youth don't have in terms of the strong parental support, her athletic abilities, and used to compete, doing homeschools, pursue her own schooling and all that stuff, opportunities. So she is wonderful. But maybe not every youth is able to be like a Zoe. So
Oh yeah, I as she described being 7 or 8 years old and hearing her dad talk about the Stanford prison
oh
experiment
yeah,
and the difference
oh yeah.
between brown-eyed and blue-eyed children, I thought, I don't think that many 7 or 8-year-olds know about those experiments or are fascinated by that. So clearly she had a lot of parental involvement, but you're
Mhm.
saying it doesn't have to be a parent, right?
It doesn't. It doesn't have to be a parent. And especially what we have found is this mentorship piece needs to be happen naturally. So when youth come into school and you have a assigned teacher and they have a job, you guys are here to learn the subject. So oftentimes it doesn't allow them to have this kind of natural mentorship or get sidetracked to learn about youth leadership or other things that tap into their interests,
Mhm.
right? So that comes to the school counselor or after school programs or sports clubs, those kind of a more relaxed setting for that kind of mentorship to happen.
Mhm.
Sometimes does plays more informal roles, but also plays a big role in terms of developing youth leadership and having them feel more connected than the formal like parents or school teachers.
And I know your particular area of interest, or one of your particular areas of interest, is out of school time initiatives. And for example, the Youth Driven Spaces project that
Mhm.
you've worked with. So you're saying teachers might become mentors, but they're so busy. So there needs to be opportunities for youth outside of school time that somehow relate to their intrinsic motivation. Could you talk a bit about that? Tell me, like, how does a program that gets set up for youth at large um, tap into intrinsic motivation?
Yeah. There's a lot of out of school time programs, different types of programs. You look at YMCA, you look at Boys and Girls Clubs, after school care, and there is Neutral Zone that I study, and their initiative that was happening in Southeast Michigan, but also across the United States. What they have is somewhat unique in a way that it put youth at the center, at the forefront of the organization.
Mhm.
They have decision making at different levels. So the old model, like the more traditional model, would say we are a group of adults wanting to do something with youth and supporting them. So we design things for youth to participate, right? And that's wonderful. And a lot of high quality programs does support youth that way. But there's this different model that says, if we were to prepare them to be leaders, why don't we give them the opportunities directly so that they can practice this leadership and maybe fail, and that's fine. Because we provide such a safety net for them to fail in this kind of space. It takes adult intentionality, a lot of intentional designs for this kind of leadership to happen. And
Okay.
so, like my work on youth adult partnership rubric sort of help training youth professionals to think about what you need to do to make that space, to make youth feel like you're tapping into my intrinsic motivation. You give
Mhm.
me the authentic decision making roles. You're trying to build this relationship with reciprocal, conversations and feedback sharing. And we are connected to a bigger cause, maybe a community initiative, maybe something that matters to us. So
Mhm.
you kind of be very intentional about how you create that space and give them the opportunity to practice everything you say is important.
You mentioned it before, the idea of failing safely. And when I think about Zoe, she was a competitive skier. So she certainly fell. She certainly didn't come first in every race. She certainly learned what it was to fail and start again. Can you talk a little bit in terms of, so our audience is people who may want to help youth become effective leaders, to develop their leadership potential. What does it mean to fail safely as you're putting together a program or as you're working with youth?
I love this question. I personally involved with student athletics,
Okay.
and I see parents feeling so anxious as the children or youth compete in the sports. And we are all having this goal of win, 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 right? So my child has this record, achieve this and that. And so it is really hard to experience failure. For youth to go through the sports and competitions, we're really preparing them to fail safely. And that means that when failure occurs, it's not just simply to say, you can do better, don't think about it, or like, we believe in you, that kind of cover things up, right?
Dialogue.
You really want them to feel like the self-worth, the things that you do well. It's all about like competing with yourself, making improvements, let's try again. And even if you win this time, encourage them to think about the appreciation of your opponents, what they did well and what you did well. That reflection piece is such an important process because youth learn how to give constructive feedback, how to take feedback, and how do you still maintain that kind of self-worth when you experience failure.
Yeah. And I hear you saying the dialogue or the comments from parents or coaches or anybody about, well, you can win next time, kind
Right.
of misses the point that we would want you to take away from this, which is effort counts too.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
having done your best, having tried hard, having tried something that didn't work out, but that was still taught you something.
Oh, yeah. And also, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that youth experiencing repetitive failure experience is a great thing, right? So it is important for them to experience success. Success builds your confidence, builds your motivation, encourage them to continue to push them on further. But it is also that that's not take failure as something that we should feel ashamed of. We can continue to improve ourselves.
Okay. One of the parts of your model that I thought was very important and that I hadn't given much thought to is in youth adult partnerships, where you're trying to help youth to develop their leadership qualities, even when there is a willingness on the part of the adults to put the youth in charge, to allow them to design the project and so on, that there can still be a resistance to youth
Oh, yeah.
voices.
Oh, yeah.
That I'm the adult, I know better. Maybe you could also offer some words of advice or some insights into how, as an adult, when I'm trying to partner with youth to help them out, how do I silence my inner dialogue about, I know better?
That's a great question. Thank you. There's a shift of concept in terms of leadership.
Okay.
So the more traditional way of thinking about leadership is a leader is somebody who is strong, has like a charisma, and people follow and crazy about him, her. She has strong opinions. She's always right or resilient, push through, and those kind of like more masculine idea. What we found from youth is youth tend to appreciate or tend to lean toward this other side of leadership, which is like everyone can be leaders. Leadership is a learned skills, a more like collaborative and democratic process, I would even say. So for them to think about leadership in this era, you want to approach them in a way that's more equal and to value them in terms of everyone has something to bring to the table, right? So adults, we do have more lived experience that often allow us to have more social capital. We know more, we have money, we have connections, we know things, we have experience. These are valuable assets. But there's also youth have perspectives in their own lived experience that can be very different from you, right? So think about like, I think first thing is to really recognize the different power dynamics what each of us can bring to the table and value that differences.
I was also interested, these may have been comments from some of the interviews that were in your article. I'm not sure where I read it, but it was about arranging spaces so that they're egalitarian, so that everybody is included in the space. Everybody has a sort of equal position, literally.
Right.
And also a very interesting idea I thought was, and I don't know if this is one of the sites that developed this idea, that there was a period of every meeting, I think it was 20 minutes, when the adults were not permitted to speak.
Net. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
called no adult talk time.
No adult
So,
talk.
and that was so hard. At first it was like, oh, that's easy. I needed a break,
Yeah.
But then you were sitting there like, but, hey, yeah. So
Yeah.
that's common. That really is,
Yeah.
but by enforcing that, also create that space that you know that, okay, this is our time. Let's work on this. And adults really intentionally step back and allow youth to have the space.
Can you talk a little bit about the kind of things that you think youth experienced from going through these processes?
So first of all, I would not say everything is positive, right? Although
Okay.
we know there's benefits, but I think often youth are like adults, feeling nervous about being a leader. But there's also this benefit that if they gone through this process and being supported, they feel like I can do this. The sense of agency. I am an individual who has power, empowerment, feeling self-worth, because a lot of youth struggle with having self-esteem, but this is a environment to help them experience that success they need. And then these other skill sets like collaboration, leadership, public speaking, writing a grand proposal, putting your thoughts together, negotiating, running meetings. That's all these critical skills that they need in order to be successful for jobs and for college application. We really want to create that space for them to experience the leadership and be a leader now, instead of always saying, just work hard, you'll be a leader tomorrow. No, youth can be the leaders for now.
I mean, if I think about Zoe's interview, just to go back to that for a moment, and she said 3 years ago, I would never have believed I could create an international program. But the milieu and supported her to actually create something from scratch.
Right.
And now she has the sense, I can do that.
Right. That's a big thing.
Yeah.
You think about, like, as adults, we often struggle with like, oh, I have million good ideas and I want to give you everything.
Yeah.
And I can articulate and like put my thoughts together in a box that can be disseminated in different cultures, in different settings, right? That this is a big thing. And to have her get to that point, this process of organizing your thoughts, using social media to connect with people from overseas. She's doing a great job, but it is also the kind of a support, I would say, that require all youth to have in order to get to that level. Right?
Yeah, and I think you mentioned social media. I think this is the place where the youth in the room have the expertise, where where very often the adults are lagging way behind in knowledge of what current social media, what happens on social media today.
But this get back to your very first question about how do we motivate them to do this? Because pretty much all youth knows how to use Instagram, right? All youth can, can do like be a YouTuber, right? Nowadays, it feels natural for them to share. But then how do you get them to be motivated to do something with a social cause, to connect with others for a bigger community good? That takes that kind of adult scaffolding, like, encouragement, and then making them aware that this issue is something that you, even as a youth, can tackle. That kind of process, encouragement, empowerment, does require adults intentional support.
I think again, one of the things I read in your work with this is that youth are encouraged to contribute to the agendas for meetings and contribute ideas for the projects and so on. I imagine that that's a very important part of what has to happen. Maybe you could talk a little bit about attracting youth to these programs. I know you do the research on the programs, and I know that that's not exactly in the mandate of your work, but you probably know a great deal about how the programs continue, how they recruit new youth to the programs. If you could talk a little bit for the adults who might be listening who say, okay, I would want to have a youth adult partnership in my community center or my school, or I'd like my kids to be involved in one of these. How do you get started with this?
You started by finding a few kids and say, hey, can you help me put together something? Tell me what you guys are interested in doing. Instead of just me constantly putting together a program and ask you to come, why don't you help me design that program? Why don't you help me invite your friends over? What kind of like snack food you want to have? That for a lot of youth, that's a big thing.
That's
right?
a big thing.
And so just starting small, starting with like really having them to be part of this recruitment and retention process. What works for you? What doesn't? What do you like to know? Engage them with where they're at, what is their interest, what are the struggles you have at school. That's also another thing. I remember there's a group of youth who are LGBTQ community, and there's things that they concern them. So, Neutral Zone created a space and say, let's talk about this at this space. You're free to be you, and they want to do something, right? They don't want to be just like the people who are being helped. They want to change things. So they did a survey to all the high school kids and have them share their experience. And as a researcher, it was like, oh, you write a report and you say, oh, 30% of the youth had experienced this. And no, what they did is they put together a show, a theater, and then say, we're performing this. So, with numbers, it doesn't have this emotional attachment, doesn't tell a story, right? They jump over that process and just play it out on the stage. Invited all like the principal, school district officials, all these adults to be in the audience and have them see this show and then turn to them and say, what are you going to do about it? For everyone to go through this process, they feel being part of something bigger and they make a change on something that affect them. And that's like a real power.
So if you want to have a youth-driven space, you're saying you start right at the beginning, asking them what they care about. I mean, this is where you started talking about intrinsic motivation, right? Like they decide what the project is going to be. You provide the scaffolding and the snacks, but they really decide what it is they're going to do. And I mean, I know your job is to do research on these things, so you do care about the numbers and you do care about the outcomes and that sort of thing, but that's not really what they care about. They care about what they want to accomplish, and and
even like expression, like, let it out, right? That's my outcome. I want to let it out. I want you to know this is my voice, right? So this go back to this adults have experience, resources. Youth have perspectives, and youth have, that the voice, the strong voice, the fresh voice that you don't have. And when we were thinking this traditional way of reporting and talking to legislators about this issue, and they were doing it differently and might achieve the same result. So this partnership becomes really meaningful and authentic to everyone.
I don't know if Zoe knows anything about these kinds of models, but it's kind of exactly what she did. Was just kind of have an idea, have something that I'm excited about, propose it, get it going, get it started, with I'm sure lots of support along the way. But
Yeah,
Really.
but also with Zoe, her model is not just for herself to be that youth leader. She's
No.
actually allowing other youth and adults, preparing them to raise more heroes,
Mhm.
right? So
Yes, yes. I mean, I think she probably had lots of help in that.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but it's, yeah, this idea of helping other youth develop themselves, to develop their heroic qualities or to
Mm,
prepare themselves.
mhm, mm.
Jamie, thank you very much for joining us today on Hero Next Door and for your perspective on youth-driven leadership and on Zoe. It was wonderful to get a chance to talk to you.
Oh yeah, likewise. I truly admire your work and this is so meaningful. Thank you for the opportunity to let me talk to you at your podcast. I hope we get stay connected.
Oh, thank you. I would like that too. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Hero Next Door. If you're interested in helping youth to develop as leaders, I really hope Zoe's story will inspire you with what a young person can do when given a chance. And I hope that the insights of Dr. Jamie Wu have given you ideas for how to engage and support youth in taking on leadership roles and helping them learn how to make prosocial contributions like the one Zoe is making. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe to Hero Next Door on Spotify or your regular podcast channel or on YouTube. And join us again soon for another episode of The Hero Next Door. Thanks for listening.